Why was no one looking at her when the room filled with voices? Not because she was late, not because she didn't belong, but because she had become invisible. Lieutenant Commander Avery Sloan stood near the back wall of the briefing room at Naval Air Station Key West, tablet resting against her forearm like an afterthought. The Florida heat had already begun to seep through the concrete, blurring the edges of the flight line outside, but inside the room the air was cool and confident. Confident in the way only people who expect nothing to go wrong ever are. They talked over her, around her, past her. Mission timelines, weather windows, risk mitigation spoken in polished phrases by people who hadn't carried the weight of consequence in years. She listened anyway. She always did. Listening had become a habit long before silence became her assignment. Her flight suit was worn but clean. The zipper caught if you pulled it too fast. She learned to ease it down slowly like everything else. The name tape on her chest read SLOAN. No one read it. They didn't need to. To them she was logistics now. Support. Background. Temporary, they had said. Temporary had stretched into months. She watched a group of SEALs lean casually against a table near the front, relaxed, joking in that way forged by shared danger and shared survival. At their center stood Commander Luke Harrion, tall, self-assured, the kind of man who carried authority like it belonged to him by default. His laugh was easy, his stories landed, the room tilted subtly toward him without effort. Avery didn't resent it. Resentment wasted energy. She had learned that early. Harrion scanned the room mid-story, eyes flicking over wings and patches until he paused. "And who's flying the Lightning today?" he asked, tone light, almost playful. A junior officer gestured vaguely. Sloan," she slotted. Harrion's eyebrows lifted, not disbelief, curiosity edged with amusement. "Really?" That was when he looked at her. She met his gaze without expression. No smile, no challenge, just presence. "Well," he said, lips curling, "guess today's going to be educational." The room responded the way rooms like this always do, a ripple of quiet laughter, not cruel, not kind, just enough to establish hierarchy. Avery nodded once, acknowledgement, not agreement. She returned her attention to the tablet, fuel margins, weather patterns, timing windows that would complicate the afternoon if anyone bothered to notice. They didn't. What they saw was a pilot who had faded without drama. What they didn't see was why. She gathered her gear as the briefing broke, movements precise, economical. Outside, the F-35 waited in the sun, its slate-gray skin reflecting heat and sky with indifference. Behind her, Harrion laughed again, already telling someone else how this might go. No one in that room believed she mattered. They were about to learn how expensive that belief could be. What kind of order sounds like a joke until it's too late to laugh? The room didn't react loudly when Harrion made his decision. That would have been crude. Instead, there was a tightening. Chairs shifted, breath caught, smiles hovered, unsure whether to land or retreat. "Lieutenant," Harrion said, voice even casual. Avery looked up. "You used to fly, correct?" The pause that followed was deliberate, long enough to sting, long enough for everyone to hear the implication. "Yes, sir." A quiet exhale somewhere near the front, quickly stifled. Harrion nodded. "Good, then you won't mind helping us with today's demonstration." Demonstration. The word landed too clean, too light. He turned toward the schedule display, fingers sliding past names everyone expected, stopping on hers. "You'll take the jet up." Silence complete. They understood instantly. This wasn't about training. It wasn't about necessity. It was authority flexing where it assumed there would be no resistance. Someone shifted uncomfortably. Another pilot glanced at Avery, then away. No one objected. That told her everything. Harrion watched her carefully now, waiting for hesitation, waiting for protest, waiting for the excuse that would let him turn this into a story later. She gave him none. "Which airframe, sir?" she asked. The question cut cleanly through the tension. Harrian blinked once. "Which jet do you want me to fly?" she repeated, calm. "Block configuration will affect how I brief the envelope." The room recalibrated in real time. Harrian recovered quickly, pointing toward the hangar doors. Lightning 27, standard profile, nothing fancy. The edge was there now. "Yes, sir." She turned and walked out. Behind her the room exhaled. Murmurs followed, speculative and sharp. "She hasn't flown in years. This is going to be ugly." "He's serious." Harrian watched her go, satisfaction settling in. He thought this was already over. What no one saw was the change in her stride when she crossed into the hangar. Not faster, not slower. Familiar. How does a rumor die when the truth hasn't spoken yet? The order moved faster than she did. "She's flying." "No way." "That's the joke, right?" Wrenches paused mid-turn. Helmets were lifted and forgotten. Eyes tracked her path as she approached the aircraft. The F-35 waited, indifferent to gossip, its angles sharp against the sun. She walked without hurry, without hesitation. The wind snapped her flight suit once, testing her resolve. She didn't look left or right. She didn't need to. The air carried everything. She washed out. "No, reassigned." "Same thing." A maintenance chief muttered, "Watch her hands," then fell silent. She reached the ladder and paused, not to steady herself, to feel the vibration of the crew moving in sync. The jet answered with quiet presence. The ladder rolled into place. The exchange was brief, professional, no wasted words. Does she even remember the startup sequence? You don't forget that. You forget everything if it's been long enough. She climbed. Each rung rang once, crisp and final. The canopy sealed with a sound that cut through the flight line. Inside, the world narrowed. Instruments, breath, memory. Her hands rested lightly on the controls, waiting. "Demonstrator confirm startup sequence," the tower said. "Confirmed." Power surged in layers. Systems came alive with intention. Lights bloomed across the panel, finding their place. No pauses, no hesitation. "That's not guessing," someone whispered. The engine's growl deepened, confident. "She's listening to it," an instructor murmured. "Not the gauges." The joke began to fracture. Demonstrator clear to taxi. She released the brakes. The aircraft rolled smooth as water, nose tracking true, no corrections needed. "She's not fighting it." "No," another whispered. "She's letting it go where it wants." At the runway she paused, one measured breath. Then the throttle moved forward. Acceleration pressed her back, clean and uncompromising. The sound changed, authority replacing doubt. At rotation speed, she lifted the nose. The wheels left the ground. The room held its breath. This was no longer a joke. What does mastery look like when it refuses to show off? At altitude, the air smoothed, and so did the doubt on the ground. She rolled gently, testing response like a pianist touching keys. The jet answered immediately. "Maintain basic maneuvering," the tower said carefully. "Copy." She showed them what basic meant. Energy managed, not spent. G-forces flirted with edges and withdrew at her command. The aircraft leaned into her inputs as if relieved. "She's managing it like a weapons officer," someone said, "not a demo pilot." Telemetry scrolled clean lines. Numbers made sense only if the hands flying knew exactly where the margins lived. The SEAL commander's posture shifted, arms uncrossed, weight forward. Recognition crept in where certainty had lived. She climbed, rolled, recovered without waste. No bravado, no spectacle. "Confirm within parameters," the tower tried again. all parameters green. And they were. What they saw wasn't recklessness. It was restraint. She finished with a disciplined pass, then turned inbound. Cleared to recover, the controller said, softer now. Silence followed. Not awkward, reverent. The jet spoke for her. When does authority realize it's been standing on the wrong side of the truth? The SEAL commander watched the approach with eyes trained by survival. The descent was calm, controlled. A memory surfaced without invitation. Dust, dusk, a canyon that should have killed them. A voice on comm, steady, unnamed. Hold tight. I've got you. The jet touched down with perfect flair. Understanding hit harder than steel. He hadn't ordered a novelty flight. He had ordered a legend. She stepped down from the cockpit, helmet under her arm, expression unchanged. He removed his cover. Then he knelt. Gasps flickered and died. For every day before this, he said, for the lives you carried when we didn't know your name. She let the truth stand. Stand up, she said quietly. Honor wasn't restored by spectacle. It was restored by recognition. What happens after the reckoning, when no one is watching anymore? Paperwork moved, quietly, efficiently. Records corrected themselves. Her name returned where it belonged. No interviews, no spotlight. She trained, mentored, corrected without theatrics. What do you want now? Someone asked. To make the next flight safer than the last. And in that answer lived the lesson. Greatness isn't built when you're finally seen. It's built when you are. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Why did the room feel smaller the moment his eyes settled on her? Not because of the rank on his chest. Not because of the confidence in his stance. But because the decision had already been made, and everyone knew it. Commander Luke Harrion let the silence stretch after saying her name, the way men do when they want the pause itself to carry weight. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Authority rarely raises its voice when it expects compliance. Lieutenant, he said again, slower this time, as if confirming a detail he already believed he understood. You used to fly. The word used hung in the air like something expired, but not yet thrown away. Avery Sloane met his gaze evenly. No tightening in her jaw, no defensive edge in her eyes, just stillness. Yes, sir. A murmur stirred and died. The room shifted, recalibrating around the exchange. Harrion nodded, the corner of his mouth lifting just enough to suggest humor without owning it. Good, he said. Then you won't mind helping us out. Helping, another clean word, another soft disguise. He turned toward the large screen where the day's schedule glowed in orderly columns. Names everyone recognized. Pilots everyone trusted. He passed over them without hesitation and stopped on hers. You'll take the jet up, he said. It landed exactly how he intended. Not as a request. Not as an invitation. As a demonstration of where power lived. No one laughed this time. That would have been too honest. Instead, the room filled with something sharper, awareness, a collective understanding that this wasn't about readiness or necessity. It was about reminding someone of her place. Avery felt it too, the familiar tightening behind her ribs, not fear, not anger, recognition. This was the moment systems use when they don't want to look cruel, when they dress humiliation in procedure and call it leadership. Someone near the front shifted in their seat. A pilot glanced at her, then away as if eye contact might imply responsibility. No one spoke up. Silence was easier. Silence always was. Harrion watched her closely now, waiting for it. The hesitation, the polite refusal, the excuse that would let him wave this away later with a grin and a story. She didn't give him any of that. Which airframe, sir? She asked. The question cut through the tension with surgical precision. Harrion blinked just once, It was subtle, but it was there, the smallest disruption to certainty. "I'm sorry," he said. "Which jet do you want me to fly?" she repeated, voice calm, neutral. "Block configuration will affect how I brief the envelope." Something shifted, not loudly, quietly. The room leaned forward without realizing it. Harrion recovered quickly. Men like him always did. He pointed toward the hangar doors. "Lightning 27, he said. "Standard profile, nothing fancy." The words carried a challenge now, a warning disguised as permission. "Yes, sir." That was it. No explanation. No defense. No performance. She turned and walked out. Behind her, the room exhaled all at once. Voices broke into low murmurs, speculation sharpening every sentence. "She hasn't flown in years." "This is going to be ugly." "He's serious." Harrion watched her go, satisfaction settling comfortably into place. To him, this was already resolved, a reminder delivered, a hierarchy reinforced. What he didn't see was the subtle change in her stride when she crossed the threshold into the hangar. Not faster, not slower. Grounded. The hangar swallowed sound the way it always did, metal and shadow absorbing the noise of doubt. The jet waited at the far end, slate gray and angular, heat shimmering along its skin. The F-35 didn't care about reputations. It didn't care about politics. It cared about precision. She walked toward it without hurry. The order reached the flight line before she did. "She's flying." "No chance." "That's the joke, right?" A wrench paused mid-turn. A checklist fluttered against a thigh. A laugh started and died halfway through, like it realized it didn't belong here. Crew members pretended to work, eyes tracking her path. Two junior pilots leaned against a ladder, helmets tucked under their arms, faces carefully neutral. One of them frowned. "Watch her hands," a maintenance chief muttered almost to himself, then went quiet. She crossed the safety line and stopped. The jet loomed close now, canopy reflecting fractured faces and bright sky. For a moment, nothing happened. The flight line held its breath. She raised one gloved hand, not for attention, not for permission, just readiness. The ladder rolled forward automatically. The exchange was brief, professional, no wasted words, no unnecessary checks. That unsettled people more than anything else. Does she even remember the startup sequence? You don't forget that. You forget everything if it's been long enough. The whispers tried to gather shape, tried to become truth. She placed her hand on the ladder and paused, not to steady herself, to feel the vibration of coordinated movement beneath her boots. The jet answered with a low, patient presence. Then she climbed. Each rung rang once, sharp and final. The canopy sealed with a sound that cut clean through the air. Inside the cockpit, the world narrowed to breath and memory. The seat fit her like it always had. The controls rested under her hands with a familiarity no desk job had ever replaced. She didn't rush. She didn't hesitate. "Demonstrator, confirm startup sequence," the tower called, voice neutral but alert. "Confirmed," she replied. The switch flipped. Power surged in layers, systems waking with disciplined order. Lights bloomed across the panel like constellations finding their place. The hum deepened, then steadied. No pauses. No double checks. Someone on the flight line noticed first. "That's not guessing," they said quietly. The engine answered with a low growl that vibrated through concrete and bone. Not loud yet, confident. "She's listening to it," a senior instructor murmured. "Not the gauges." The joke began to crack. Fuel flow stabilized. Temperatures settled. She adjusted trim with a microcorrection so subtle it would have been missed by anyone who hadn't watched pilots for decades. The aircraft responded immediately. A maintenance chief frowned. "That's not how you fly when you're rusty." The engine's presence filled the space now, bending attention toward it. Ground crew moved faster, signals sharper. They felt it too. From the tower, a pause. "Demonstrator, you're clear to taxi." She acknowledged and released the brakes. The jet rolled forward smoothly, nose tracking straight as if drawn along an invisible line. No lurch, no correction. "She's not fighting it," a junior pilot whispered. "No," his wingman replied. "She's letting it go where it wants." At the hold short line, she stopped. The engine idled, patient. She took one slow breath, then pushed the throttle forward. Acceleration pressed her back cleanly, uncompromising. The sound changed, authority replacing doubt. The runway disappeared beneath her with inevitable calm. Someone on the ground said very softly, "That's not a demo." She held centerline with a touch so light it looked effortless. At rotation speed, she lifted the nose. The wheels left the ground. For a fraction of a second, the flight line froze between disbelief and awe. Then the jet climbed, smooth and decisive, unmistakably alive in her hands. Whatever this had been meant to prove, it was no longer about embarrassment. The sky had taken over now, and it was listening to her. What does it mean when the sky answers back? Not with noise, not with spectacle, but with obedience. At 10,000 feet, the air changed. The turbulence smoothed out, the engine settled into a deeper rhythm, and the world below shrank into geometry and shadow. Up here, there were no whispers, no smirks, no ranks pinned to chests. Only truth. Avery Sloane leveled the jet and eased the throttle back just enough to let it breathe. The F-35 responded the way it always had when flown by someone who listened more than they commanded. Calm, balanced, ready. She rolled left into a shallow bank. Then right. Not testing limits, testing trust. The jet answered without hesitation. On the ground, eyes tracked the movement across wide screens and naked sky. Conversations died mid-sentence. Someone reached for a pen and forgot why. "Demonstrator," the controller said carefully. "Maintain basic maneuvering." "Copy," she replied. Basic. The word meant different things to different people. She tightened the turn just enough to feel the onset of G, then bled it away with a precise counterinput that kept her energy intact. No wasted motion. No panic correction. The aircraft leaned into her hands like it had been waiting for them. "She's managing energy like a weapons officer," a senior instructor said, almost to himself. "Not a demo pilot." She climbed into a vertical that stopped short of bravado, rolled cleanly through the apex, and recovered without losing more speed than doctrine demanded. Not because she feared the margins. Because she respected them. Telemetry scrolled clean lines, elegant curves, numbers that made sense only if the person flying knew exactly where the edge lived and chose not to live there. The radio crackled with muted voices, quickly silenced. This wasn't something to talk over. She eased into a high alpha pass, nose elevated, controls whispering beneath her gloves. Warning thresholds flirted at the edge of awareness, then receded as she feathered input so small it looked like thought. "Watch the yaw," someone warned. She already had. A micro-correction smoothed it out before the sentence finished. On the observation line, Commander Luke Harrion shifted his stance, arms uncrossed, weight forward. The confidence he'd worn like armor earlier had begun to crack. Not because she was showy. Because she was. This wasn't flying for approval. This was flying because it was right. She transitioned into a descending spiral tighter than doctrine preferred, then recovered with a rollout so clean it looked rehearsed. It was remembered. "Is that even in our syllabus?" a pilot whispered. "It should be," someone else replied. She accelerated, then decelerated without drama, managing thrust like a dial instead of a lever. The jet followed without complaint, Partner, not platform. From the tower, another attempt. Demonstrator, confirm you're within parameters. She smiled then, just slightly, not because she was breaking rules, but because she was. Affirmative, she said, all parameters green. And they were. What the ground saw wasn't recklessness. It was restraint sharpened by experience. She didn't chase applause, didn't reach for spectacle. She left nothing on the table that mattered and nothing extra that didn't. Doubt drained away in real time. Pens moved, notes were taken, screens were zoomed in, then out again, as if clarity might disappear if they blinked too long. Harrion felt it in his chest before he named it. Recognition. A memory surfaced uninvited. Dust in the air, a canyon at dusk, tracers stitching sky where a helicopter should never have been, comms filled with static and fear, and then a voice. Steady. Unemotional. Hold tight 30 seconds. Another memory followed. Eyes on me, I've got you. Back then no one had been told the pilot's name. They were told not to ask, classified, redacted, convenient. Now the cadence matched, the control, the refusal to dramatize survival. His jaw tightened. The pieces aligned with a discomfort he hadn't expected. She finished with a simple pass, level, fast, disciplined, then pulled into a climb that traded speed for altitude like an investment, not a gamble. No flourish. No bow. Silence followed. Not the awkward kind. The kind that arrives when argument has nowhere left to stand. She keyed the mic again. Request vectors for return. The controller took a beat longer than necessary. Approved, he said quietly, cleared to recover. On the flight line, someone exhaled as if they'd been holding their breath for 15 minutes. Another shook his head, a smile breaking through disbelief. The joke was gone. In its place stood something heavier. Undeniable skill that didn't ask permission, excellence that didn't raise its voice. And for the first time since the order had been given, no one was laughing. The jet turned inbound, a silver blade cutting back toward the field. And as it did, something else turned with it. Not in the sky. Inside the man who had ordered her into it. When did confidence turn into reckoning? Not when the jet touched down. Not when the telemetry confirmed what everyone already knew. But when memory caught up with truth. Commander Luke Harrion stood at the edge of the flight line as the aircraft turned inbound, its silhouette cutting cleanly through the afternoon haze. He had stood in places like this before, waiting, watching, expecting things to go wrong and preparing himself to respond when they did. This felt different. The approach was disciplined, conservative, respectful of the ground, not the profile of someone trying to impress, the profile of someone who understood how easily arrogance turns lethal. Harrion's throat tightened. A memory surfaced without permission. A canyon years ago, dusk turning the air into dust and shadow, radios filled with clipped urgency, then fear, a helicopter trapped where it never should have been, men pinned down, options collapsing. And then a voice. Calm, even almost gentle. Hold tight 30 seconds. Another pause. Eyes on me, I've got you. The sky had bent that night, not dramatically, precisely, something impossible becoming exact at the moment it mattered most. They made it out, barely. No one ever told him the pilot's name. He'd been told not to ask. The jet descended now, gear deploying with clean mechanical certainty. The approach angle was textbook, but there was judgment in it, a margin of care that only came from someone who had learned what happens when margins disappear. Around him, the flight line had changed. No one joked. No one whispered. No one pretended this was still entertainment. Even the instructors stood still, hands folded or clenched unconsciously, eyes fixed on the aircraft as if movement might break something sacred. "That profile," someone murmured behind him, "same as Kandahar extract." "No," another replied quietly, "it can't be." Harrion watched the flare. "Perfect." The wheels kissed the runway, not slammed, not floated, just right. The jet rolled out clean, controlled, obedient. The truth landed harder than steel. He hadn't ordered a grounded officer to fly as a lesson. He had ordered someone who had never stopped being who she was. The aircraft slowed, turned off, engines spooling down into silence that felt intentional. The canopy rose, heat shimmered and faded. She climbed down without ceremony. No pause for effect. No scan of the crowd. No claim of victory. Helmet tucked under her arm, posture unchanged. Harrion felt heat crawl up his neck, not anger, shame. He remembered the paperwork, the redactions, the reassignment memos signed without reading past the summary. He remembered telling himself it was procedural, necessary, efficient. He remembered choosing comfort over curiosity. She walked toward him now, measured, professional, eyes forward. Each step tightened something inside him he hadn't known could still feel pressure. Around them time slowed. A crew chief stopped mid-motion. A junior officer lowered his voice, even though no one was speaking. A radio squawked and was silenced immediately. She stopped a respectful distance away. Not submissive. Not defiant. Present. For a moment Harrion said nothing. The words he'd used all his life, command phrases, orders, expectations, felt brittle in his mouth. Then he did something he hadn't done in years. He stepped forward and removed his cover. The movement rippled through the line like a shockwave. A SEAL commander exposing himself, literally and otherwise, was not part of any protocol anyone recognized. He looked at her. Really looked. And found no accusation there, no triumph, only clarity. "I owe you," he said. The words sounded smaller than he wanted, so he continued. "Not for today," he added, voice steady despite the collapse happening behind his ribs. "For every day before it." She didn't speak. "For the lives you carried when we didn't know your name," he said. "For the silence you kept when we took the easy road." The flight line held its breath. Then he dropped to one knee. The sound of fabric against concrete was louder than the engine had been. Gasps flared and died. Someone whispered his name as if it might stop the moment from becoming real. He kept his eyes up. "Honor isn't rank," he said, "and leadership isn't comfort. I forgot that." She watched him without moving. She didn't rush to absolve him. Didn't reach out to stop the moment. Didn't soften it for him. She allowed the truth to stand without decoration. Then she spoke. "Stand up." 2 words, quiet, firm. He obeyed. Not because he was ordered to. Because he understood. As he rose, something inside him settled into place. Not lighter, honest. He replaced his cover slowly. The gesture felt different now. Earned, not assumed. Around them the base exhaled. No applause followed. No cheers. Just a collective recognition that something fundamental had shifted. She turned away first. Not in dismissal, in completion. The moment didn't end when she walked back toward the hangar. It lingered, heavy and exacting, settling over the flight line like weather no one could ignore. People moved differently now. Tools were handled with care. Voices stayed low. Eyes lingered where they used to slide away. The senior instructor cleared his throat. "Secure the aircraft," he said. The order rippled outward, precise and subdued. As the jet cooled behind her, heat dissolving into nothing, she paused once at the hangar threshold. Turned. Not to the crowd. To the runway. The place where doubt had tried to make it stand. The place where it had failed. Harrion met her gaze from across the distance. He nodded. Not as a superior. Not as an equal. As a man corrected in full view of his own certainty. She returned nothing. She didn't need to. When she disappeared into the hangar, the silence didn't break. It softened, and everyone who stood there understood the same unspoken truth. Never mistake quiet for absence. Never mistake restraint for weakness. And never assume the sky forgets who belongs to it. What happens after the truth has spoken, and no one is left to argue with it? Not celebration. Not punishment. Adjustment. The system moved the way systems always do when they realize denial has become expensive. Quietly, efficiently, without apology, doors closed, voices lowered, decisions happen behind glass and secure terminals where reckoning doesn't announce itself, it documents. Paperwork that once stalled now moved with clinical speed. Records were pulled, timestamps re-examined, chains of approval retraced to their weakest link. No one raised their voice. No one needed to. The facts were enough. Avery Sloane wasn't summoned. She wasn't asked to explain herself. That was the first real correction. Her name reappeared on flight rosters without ceremony. Qualifications were revalidated by officers who didn't meet her eyes. A sealed addendum was added to her file, thin, precise, irreversible, acknowledging what should never have been questioned. She had never lost the standard. The standard had lost her. She read the assignment memo once, folded it carefully, and slipped it into the pocket of her flight suit. Not a promotion pitch, not a victory lap, a responsibility, training oversight, tactical review, authority without spotlight, influence without noise. It felt right. Outside, the base returned to rhythm. Engines cycled. Crews moved with practiced efficiency. The world did what it always did. But the air felt different. A junior pilot paused as she passed, hesitated, then nodded. Not admiration, respect, the kind that doesn't ask for permission. She stopped near the edge of the tarmac as the sun dipped low, shadows stretching long across concrete. Aircraft stood in quiet rows, indifferent to drama, loyal only to competence. One lifted cleanly into the sky. She didn't feel the pull to follow it, not yet. What the system owed her wasn't another moment. It was a future where this never happened again. A future where skill didn't require humiliation as proof, where quiet professionals weren't erased by procedure, where courage didn't need witnesses to be valid. Inside the hangar, conversations changed. Not louder, more careful. Names were spoken with intention. Assumptions were questioned before they hardened into policy. Small habits were corrected before they grew into danger. She mentored without announcement, trained without theatrics. When she corrected someone, she did it privately. When she praised, she did it briefly. Preparation mattered, discipline mattered, ego didn't. Pilots learned quickly that bravado had no currency around her. Precision did. Accountability did. Silence earned through work did. When someone finally asked her what she wanted now, she didn't answer immediately. She watched a trainee run a checklist, hands steady but eyes still searching for confidence. To make the next flight safer than the last, she said. The answer unsettled people who were used to ambition wearing a louder uniform. Because greatness, she showed them, isn't built in the moment you're finally seen. It's built in the long stretch of days when you are. When you do the work anyway. When you choose restraint over resentment. When you protect the mission, even as the mission forgets to protect you. Her legacy wasn't the kneel. It wasn't the silence that followed. It wasn't even the flight. It was what changed afterward. Recalibrated standards. Reopened questions. A quiet permission for truth to surface the next time it tried to sink. Somewhere down the line, another pilot would be underestimated. another file labeled temporary, another competence made inconvenient. And because of her, it would be harder to bury. She never asked to be seen. She asked the system to be better. And when it finally was, even just a little, she turned back to the work, carrying forward a lesson older than rank and stronger than ego. Honor doesn't announce itself. It endures. It waits in silence, sharpens itself in duty, and reveals its power only when the moment demands it. Never for praise. Never for permission. The reckoning had passed. What remained was legacy, still forming, still quiet, still alive. What stays when the noise fades and only the work remains? Not the kneel, not the flight, not the silence that followed. What stays is what changes. Weeks passed without ceremony. No banners, no quotes, no polished narrative shaped for someone else's comfort. The base returned to routine because routine is how institutions survive. But routines carry memory even when people pretend they don't. Avery Sloane moved through those days the same way she always had. Early mornings, late debriefs, long hours spent listening more than speaking. Her presence no longer went unnoticed, but it also wasn't announced. That mattered to her. Respect that has to be reminded isn't respect at all. She sat in on evaluations, asked questions that made people uncomfortable in the right way, not accusatory, precise, the kind that forced thought instead of defense. Why was this assumption made? What evidence supported that call? Who carried the risk when it failed? There were no raised voices, just pauses where answers should have been. Pilots adjusted, instructors recalibrated. Junior officers learned that confidence without preparation didn't impress her, it worried her. And worry in aviation was a warning sign. She corrected gently but firmly, never in public, never to make a point at someone's expense. She remembered too well what humiliation did to judgment. Commander Harrion crossed paths with her occasionally after that day. When he did, he acknowledged her with a nod that carried weight, not deference, accountability, the kind that doesn't ask forgiveness repeatedly, the kind that learns. He never mentioned the kneel again. He didn't need to. The base itself seemed to remember, a subtle shift in how names were spoken, how silence was interpreted, how competence was valued even when it arrived quietly. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the runway in copper and shadow, Avery stood alone near the tarmac. A jet lifted off in the distance, its ascent clean and sure. She watched until it disappeared into the sky. She thought about the pilots who would come after her, the ones who would never know how close the system had come to losing them before they'd even been tested, the ones who would benefit from standards that no longer bent around ego. She felt no bitterness, only responsibility. Because dignity, she had learned, doesn't demand the spotlight. It doesn't shout to be heard. It doesn't even ask to be believed. It shows up, prepared, steady, uncompromising in its quiet. She turned back toward the hangar, toward the work that never really ends, the work of keeping people alive, of keeping truth intact when convenience tries to erode it. Some stories end with triumph. This one ended with continuity. And that was enough. Because sometimes the strongest thing a person can do isn't to prove everyone wrong. It's to keep doing what's right after everyone finally notices. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.